Good morning. My name is Bernd Ullerman. I'm from the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition in South Africa. I'm a director with the DTIC in the Regional Industrial Development Unit. And I've been working with Industrial Parks and SEZs for a number of years now. I've also done some work prior to being with the DTIC, where I've only been working for about 5 or 6 years in the same space. I will be your moderator this morning, and we have a really interesting panel here of people with quite diverse backgrounds to actually guide us into the conversation around SEZs and industrial parks as economic hubs and moving economies forward, especially in Africa, but also, of course, in each country. I would like to just give a brief introduction to every single one of our panelists, and I'd like to start with the ladies first, of course. Who is Reem Mahmoud Abdelaziz from Egypt. Reem is the senior advisor of industrial areas in Egypt from GIZ. She holds a master's of international and development economics. Reem has worked for over 20 years in multinational organizations. She has designed and managed numerous development projects and events related to business policy and strategy advisory services. These projects have provided technical assistance activities to governmental and international and local private organizations. She has been involved in promoting access to financial and non-financial business development services for SMEs. She has provided strategy and policy support to governments and also promoted strategic partnerships and adapting the investor-friendly industrial approach to industrial policies for fostering sustainable industrial areas that balance performance operationally, economically, ecologically, and of course, socially. You will recognize that these, of course, speak to the key pillars of sustainability as well. She has been involved in designing, managing, and evaluating staff and organizational development events, such as training and educational workshops, public-private dialogues, business-to-business meetings and linkages, webinars, exhibitions for investors, and so on. Reem, welcome.
Thank you.
Next, I would like to move on to Abubakari Ibrahim. Abubakari is from Ghana. He is the Principal Industrial Promotion Officer who until recently was the team leader of the Industrial Park and Special Economic Zone team of the Ministry of Trade and Industry in Ghana. In this portfolio, he has led the team to design major policy considerations in the concept development of the Industrial Park and SEZ project of the ministry, and also resource mobilization to implement these. Mr. Abubakari held his portfolio from September 2017 to May of 2021. He has obtained his bachelor's degree from the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Ghana and a master's degree in international studies with a development and cooperation option at the GSIS Korea University in South Korea in 2013. Abubakari, you are most welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next, I would like to come to our colleague from Namibia, Mr. Mbahupu Hipi Chivikua. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the Walvis Bay Corridor Group. He has over 13 years of experience in the corridor management, transportation, and logistics industry. He has worked for the WCG before as project manager for Safe Trade and Transport Corridors program. And before joining the group, he was the executive for commercial and marketing at Transnamib. He also served in senior roles such as the executive strategy and stakeholder management and senior manager operations. Hippie has an MSc in operations management and leadership from the Worcester Polytechnic Institute, Massachusetts, USA. He has an B.Ed honors from Rhodes University and an HED from the University of Namibia. He has also a certificate in project management from the University of Stellenbosch and a certificate in financial management from the Namibia University of Science and Technology. So as you can see, we have some quite well-qualified people on this panel this morning. Good morning, Hippie.
Good morning, Brent. Good morning, everyone.
Excellent. Thanks to have you with us. Next, I would like to come to Paul Jordan. Paul is an African integrated development expert, specializing in resource-based and spatial development strategies. He has wide experience working on economic growth and development in South Africa, the SADC, West and East Africa. He has spent 16 years in Mozambique and Zimbabwe during the struggle against apartheid, working as a geologist, geophysicist, manager, and minerals economist before returning to South Africa in 1991. Subsequently, he worked for the NUM and then the ANC and the South African government in various positions, including the Minerals and Energy Policy Coordinator for the ANC in 93 to 95. He's been the Deputy Director General in the DTIC as well in 1998 to 2000, a couple of years before I joined. And he has been also the President of Mintec, which is a research parastatal between 2000 and 2007. Paul Jordan is probably one of those gentlemen that you will call the wise old men with the white hair. So Paul, very welcome this morning. Then lastly, I'd like to come to, well, almost lastly, to JC Kreiling. JC is with the Econogistics Group. He is a seasoned environmental logistics and project management specialist. He has over 16 years experience in environmental management and more than 21 years experience in project management and consulting. JC has experience in implementing and managing environmental management systems, as well as in logistics and facility management at all levels of government, which is local, provincial, and national in South Africa. JC has experience in working across all levels of industry, from SMEs through to multinationals, both locally and abroad. He has been responsible for projects related to corridor programs, economic infrastructure development, environmental management, and also automotive consulting and project implementation. JC, you are most welcome.
Thanks, Barry. Nice to be here.
Excellent. Lastly, but not least, Henry. Henry Nuarenda is from the National Cleaner Production Center of South Africa. He's described himself as a project manager with passion. I am in the privileged position to actually work a lot with Henry, and I can attest to this. He has demonstrated experience working in the waste sector, in the industrial waste management, and also the circular economy. He has worked in the NCPC and successfully managed the setup of industrial symbiosis projects that is now a national program. Currently, Henry is also the team leader of the NCPC for the Global Eco-Industrial Parks program of UNIDO that is also funded by SECO in South Africa. This program aims to assess and promote the transition of industrial parks to eco-industrial parks in South Africa. Henry, you are most welcome.
Thank you.
Right, I think let's dive right in. So if you consider industrial parks and SEZs, it is a well-known fact that many governments all over the world actually understand these kind of spaces to be instrumental as economic hubs and moving economies forward. So they are seen as a catalyst and facilitating economic development. Within that space, of course, there's a wide variety of typical support systems and services that one can have in place to actually achieve this. Okay, this can include things like business support services, for example, shared services, shared facilities. Governments very often have some form of incentive structure in place. And of course, also what is a critical aspect to make these successful is, of course, the right regulatory framework from government's perspective. Okay, and then lastly, but not least, very often one really needs to ensure that there's integration of these spaces with local or regional development. And also, of course, very often the focus is on establishing the supportive infrastructure for this. So I would like us to start, and I will give everyone an opportunity to speak for about 5 minutes or so, just to give your perspective on, what should this support system look like? What are these support services? What are these shared services that are required to actually make these kind of spaces more successful and actually achieve this objective of driving economies forward, both at a national, but also at a regional and continental level. Hippie, I would like to start off with you. So from the Namibian experience and your experience in Walvis Bay especially, are there any particular aspects that you would like to highlight? Maybe just share with us your experience from Namibia.
Thank you very much, Brent. Basically, from Namibia, what I can say is that we were basically having the framework of the export economic zones. We are doing away with the export economic zones, and now we are embracing the special economic zones. The law has not yet been enacted, but it's quite an advanced stage where we hopefully, and now we are towards the end of the year, but hopefully very soon we will be able to have it tabled in Parliament to be adopted. But I see a broader benefits of the special economic zones, and I'll speak only not from the Namibian perspective, but from the Southern African perspective. I visited the special economic zones like in Zambia, in Zimbabwe, and these are very good initiatives. And coupled with the logistics and transportation sector, which is a catalyst for economic development, I think it is a platform to attract new industries and grow other sectors, whether they are formal or informal. It's also there to create sustainable employment. What we believe is that the special economic zone can be linked to the inland distribution hubs and also connect to the rural communities. So therefore, you can also mitigate rural-urban migration. And it's a good platform for us to showcase these goods for exports, to promote international trade, and also increase the significance of SADC internationally. I think that's what I can submit for now, and we can roll out the discussion for more opportunities as we discuss.
Okay, so your focus really is on providing that support for that trade and that exposure of local products, right?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, excellent. I think let's jump onto Henry. Henry, you know, from your experience working with especially eco-industrial parks in South Africa, but also, of course, you know, through your exposure with the SEZs and some other industrial parks, what would you say from your experience are actually, you know, worthwhile areas of support to consider to actually drive the South African economy?
Thank you, Ben. Well, it's a plethora of experiences from the specific industrial parks we've been working with towards the implementation of eco-industrial parks approaches. And what has come out as one of the major reverence or the major needs for these industrial parks to move from where they are to the desired your special economic zones kind of setup, the park management itself in an organized industrial park or your special economic zone needs specific attention to offer specific services to the park tenants. When the park tenants are well versed with what the park management can offer in terms of resources, in terms of infrastructure support, in terms of logistical support, you will definitely have a plethora of industries coming and locating in a specific industrial park or a specific special economic zone because of the offerings that will be given to make sure their production process is enhanced and it goes to the next level. And in addition to that, if you look at, you have a specific special economic zone, you have an industrial park, it is established, but you need tenants in there. When they are there, they have to compete for resources. And the application or the introduction of these particular park tenants to use resources efficiently is very critical in terms of energy, in terms of water, in terms of materials, and also in terms of managing waste. If you have those resources, use it efficiently. One, tenants will be rest assured that they will be able to get enough to enhance their production process. That's number two. That's number one. Then number two, they know they have specific support from the park management. If they need any resource, they will always approach the park management. They have a direct channel to approach the park management, even the government support, specifically if it is a specific government department that can give them support to make sure they stay in their production process. And if those are assured, obviously you will be having special economic zones or industrial parks that are set up to continuously and sustainably promote their production and growth.
Okay.
Back to you.
So, thank you. So the focus really, from your perspective, would be to see whether one can expand the kind of support services that are in parks and SEZs to actually aid the production processes, right? Understand that correctly?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, right, got it. Okay, let's move right to the top of Africa. I'd like to, give Reem a chance to share a bit from her experience in Egypt and also working in other areas on this. Reem, from your experience, what are these kind of support mechanisms that you think we need in industrial parks and SEZs to really drive the economic development?
Of course, yes. Thank you, Brian. So speaking about my experience and speaking under the scope of our session today, if you recall, our session is targeting SEs, special economic zones, as economic hubs. And what is an economic hub? Economic hub is a geographical location where there are evidence that resident companies or resident institutions can move freely and have their main commerce needs and services. And this is what happened in Egypt. So as other governments, they all target that the special economic zones are their main driver for trade, export, industrial activity that happened in Egypt through the 70s, 80s, and 90s. However, that led to economic development, but it had adverse impact on the social and environmental aspects. Therefore, the term or the concept or the package of social sustainable economic management or sustainable industrial areas management had developed, or eco-industrial parks. So in my experience, and that's what I have been working through the past 4 years with the Industrial Development Authority here in Egypt, is to define the package of managing industrial zones. It's not only services, it's not only incentives, it's not only policies. That's why we started with doing a benchmarking study on all over Egypt with samples of industrial zones. And we agreed with the consultants who have been working with the UNIDO and with GIZ and the World Bank that the aim is to reach, to have eco-industrial parks in Egypt, or in other terms, we say sustainable industrial areas. And we defined management as 3 main categories. The first is the development of the industrial zone itself, the design, the planning, how and where and what are the steps that are, what are the standards to build an industrial zone, complemented by the package of regulations and regulations mainly for industrial zones, and finally the operations package. So each government, each industrial zones, whether it's private or public, need to focus on what the investor need for the daily, the day-to-day operations. And this covers everything, basic services like cleaning and security and others, and the more advanced other than the mandatory services like maintenance, like B2B meetings, like deciding which industries together can form a symbiosis, whatsoever. So it's a whole package, and it's a long journey that we started with the Egyptian government here and still to be complemented. If this, I hope that this answers your question.
That is quite comprehensive, and I think it almost touches as well on the things that Henry has already said, and in a certain way also what CP has referred to. Staying in the north of Africa, from Ghana's perspective, Abu Bakari, you of course have been probably in a very similar position as to what I am in South Africa in the DTIC. So how do you see this? What do you believe, and from your experience and from the work that you've done, what are the kind of support mechanisms in Ghana? Are they similar? Are they different? Please share with us some of your insights.
Thank you very much. Yes, what has been discussed from the Egypt point of view and the other countries is not much different from what is taking place in Ghana. Ghana participation in the SEZ space dated back in the 1995. We started with the free zone concept, where we allowed 70% of the manufacturers be exported, whilst 30% is allowed into the domestic market. We have seen the challenge of local participation in this space because startups and growing companies may not have the 70% export market share. So for that matter, the program was not very successfully, even though the park is currently being completed at almost 90% occupancy. Currently, what government of Ghana is doing is to adopt the SEZ initiatives, where industrial parks and special economic zone of various kinds, either community-specific parks or any other type, can be developed, managed, and run by the private sector instead of the government. So what we are doing is to acquire land banks and then develop land banks, do the market sounding, get the private sector participants to develop and then do the on-site infrastructure and then do the marketing and management of the sites. Currently, the program has just been rolled out. What we are currently doing is to conduct site assessment of unidentified land banks. From this site assessment, we are also doing a benchmarking to see what policies can work best for us, what exists in the neighboring countries, and then other economies. Then we also establish a viability gap fund that will support the private sector to access this fund to construct and do the on-site development of this site. At the same time, government also identify certain areas to be developed, that is the off-site. So government will concentrate to bring the power infrastructure, the water infrastructure, the roads to the doorsteps of these designated parks. Then the private sector will also roll it out. What we want to do, commitment, is to do an SEZ policy, which will be supported by an implementing act and LI. So this act and then the LI, that's legislative instrument, will spell out the incentive packages that a park developer or operator will tend to benefit. At the same time, what the resident tenants of this developed sites will also benefit. And we are also adopting an approach to this site development. We have identified some industries as anchor. One is the automobile industry, and then the agro-processing sector, steel industry, and the like, as well as pharmaceuticals. Ghana has the potential next to Nigeria in terms of pharmaceuticals for generic products. So we want to entice the private sector to do sector-specific industrial development in these zones, either only agricultural processing or pharmaceutical processing and related services. So we are in talks with these private sector players to participate keenly in this sector. And the anchor industry also have a specific policies that relates to that sector. If it comes to auto policy, we have developed an auto policy, thanks and then to the help of South African Auto Association. They have helped my ministry to develop an auto policy that has spelled out a specific benefit to drive within that sector. And what we encourage to do is to develop park and then spare parts and component manufacturing related services in these areas to support that park. And similar policies will be rolled out to support all the initiatives that we are intend doing. But in terms of general support, what Ghana is adopting, we also have SMEs that will have to be supported to be able to outsource their services to the bigger companies that will be located in the industrial enclaves. So we are doing business registration and regulation improvement in the country. This program is to help all government institutions digitize their regulation so that multinational companies that want to come and register their business should be able to know I'm registering my business in 5 working days. I'm getting construction permits in 5 working days or 10 working days. I'm getting electricity connectivity in so many days. So this program is to help all the agencies providing services to enhance their services readiness for the private sector to enjoy. We are also looking at the quality infrastructure space because after manufacturing, what next? You need to export. We have barriers to export, non-tariff barriers that are more dangerous than even tariff barriers. So we are helping our QI institution to be able to enhance their services in terms of laboratory, in terms of certification, and other related services to enhance the general private sector to be able to do their business and do it well. So briefly, this is what I'll submit to my co-panelists for the next discussion to follow. Thank you very much.
Oh, Abubakar, that's a whole bunch of things that you are involved with. And I can definitely see it reminds me of, you know, some of the things that we're doing in South Africa. One of the focus areas, for example, is is what we call a one-stop shop to try and address, you know, some of those barriers that industry often finds. I'm not sure we're there yet, but I hear both from Hippie and yourself that, and even to a certain extent from what Reem has said, that might be a good core aspect to providing these kinds of services, is that kind of thinking. JC and Paul, I would like to get to you next. JC, you have obviously done quite a bit of consulting work in different areas, you know, and also not just in South Africa, in a number of different countries. From your experience, I mean, similarities, differences, what can you share with us to, you know, and I'm sure you have a lot to say. You only have 5 minutes. Okay, please go ahead.
Thanks, Baron. Yeah, and to all the esteemed panel members, I think, you know, thanks for giving me all the ammunition to talk. I think, you know, like you said, we've been exposed to many facets of SEZs, IDZs, industrial parks, and so forth. And I think in many instances, they've got a specific goal. Everybody wants to achieve, every government wants to achieve something through them. And we shouldn't leave out of focus that the infrastructure is core to creating the enabling environment. It is not about creating infrastructure for the sake of creating the infrastructure and hoping that investment will come. We should develop the infrastructure in support of a specific demand or need. And that is what has been, I think, telling across all the countries that we've worked on these programs is there was the industrial park program before that was built around a specific incentive and a specific reason, especially the older industrial parks in South Africa was built in very remote areas. It was in support of the political dispensation at that time to try and stop people from moving around. Then we had the industrial IDZs, which was built around trying to get our export market going. So they were all close to ports and you know, export routes so that we can start exporting our products. And then we came with the SEZ program, which is supposed to still be a special program. And that is what is always the question is, what makes an SEZ programs? What's making SEZ special from the next industrial park or the next IDZ or whatever the case might be? And unfortunately, in many instances, it is an incentive. We want to attract foreign direct investment into the country. We want to not necessarily move industry from one park to the other, because now this park has got an incentive and that one doesn't. And that's why we see so many industrial areas dying as well. Those industrial areas that are dying, I think, requires a different sort of support function from an infrastructure perspective, and that's what Henry and his team is trying to do, I think, in looking at circular economies, looking at tackling the waste streams, eco-friendly, making the parks more eco-friendly, so that there's synergies between the entities. So it depends on from where you look. If you look at, we worked in Zambia, the parks are mostly related to the mining industry. We looked at Namibia, specifically around the logistics sector, and the parks there should be in support of the logistics strategy because your country is based on a logistics economy. So the parks must have a specific focus, and in my view, I think we are verging on the edge of creating too many special economic zones, which will make it lose its flavor and it will make it lose its speciality. In the sense that every province and every city now wants an SEZ, which is obviously great if we can build infrastructure for every SEZ and there's enough market. My view on all of these things is we need to check the market first. We need to understand government can create the environment, the conducive environment. They can write the conducive policies. They can maybe support with incentives, but ultimately you want private sector to invest. You want private sector to move in, and you want private sector to create jobs and manufacture something, whether it's for the local market or the export market. From a holistic perspective, again, you cannot do this without the right infrastructure. Whether it's a corridor that links this industrial area to a specific market, or whether it is actually placing these special zones or development zones close to a specific sector. We saw that in the automotive sector in South Africa, where we placed the automotive component manufacturers and suppliers closer to the OEMs, and it's booming because you reduce logistics inputs, you reduce lead times and all of those things, so it works. But just putting a park up for the sake of putting a park up without necessarily checking the market, checking your export routes, checking your infrastructure requirements, and looking at who's going to ultimately implement and operate it, I think it becomes risky. And we see this. We see that many of the parks that were previously developed are becoming, unfortunately, dilapidated and run down because people try to move to the new areas with the new incentives. I don't want to go on too much about incentives. I think Paul might want to say something about incentives. I don't know. But I think, create an enabling environment, create a conducive environment through the government's role, then you'll have a recipe for success. Bring in the global eco-industrial park type approaches for greening, for reducing the footprint, reducing the impact. Because ultimately this has not only an economic impact, it has a social impact, it has an environmental impact. So there's a whole lot of aspects to investigate when you actually start looking at creating an SEZ environment or an industrial park environment, clustering of initiatives and those type of things. So we can carry on forever. This is an infrastructure in Durban, I think, or manufacturing in Durban. We need to realize that ultimately, we want to see manufacturing happening in South Africa. We want to see beneficiation of our resources. We're not, as a country, going to make, and I don't think any of the countries represented here are making any money out of just exporting their raw goods. We're not creating work by exporting raw goods. We should beneficiate whatever it is, whether it's agriculture, whether it's metals and minerals. I do believe that ultimately that is why the SEZ program was created as well, is to see how we can capitalize on those assets before we send it out of the country and even utilize it within the country. That's my view. Maybe just a quick one. I'm open to questions and answers.
Thanks, JC. Very interesting perspective there. I think that's definitely a key success factor, is that enabling environment. I think what you're touching on in terms of beneficiation as well is probably something, Paul, I don't know, what your experience has been in that space, But again, Paul, from your perspectives, looking at economic growth and development in the country, and the work that you've done in the past, especially in the geological field as well, where a lot of mineral endowments are actually existing in Africa. Very often the focus is only on, can we just attack companies that will just, maybe process a part of this or just export this. Is there a space perhaps for us to do more active and more intentional development in SEZs and industrial parks that, coming back to what Henry said, is providing that support for those kind of companies? Is that something that companies rather should do themselves? What do you think? And I mean, broader as well, your experience and views on this, Paul.
Wow, that's the universe and everything else.
Sorry.
Yeah, never right from the beginning, when we first conceptualized these way back just after liberation, was it beneficiation? That's obviously a comparative advantage that South Africa had. And in fact, it wasn't so much beneficiation as at the time we had a massive, very cheap electricity surplus. So we saw that being a major attractor. So what we had going for us was really only two things: our resource endowment and cheap electricity. We still have the first, the other one's gone for a Burton. So that also relates to the eco-industrial park, in that we saw a move towards sustainability, not because we had green parks or green enterprises, but because electricity became unreliable. And your only off-grid solution that were becoming increasingly competitive were renewables. So that started happening. But we also had really old fossil fuel-based alternative generators, etc. But it was all driven by the utility becoming extremely unreliable, as we all know. Blackouts, which are euphemistically called load shedding, but they're blackouts. So that's first. But to rewind how this all started, first of all, we need to debunk the old border industries. They weren't based on economic reality. They were based on a racist, absolute rubbish model of people moving from fake states into these border industries. It's not a problem if they die. So I disagree with Mr. Kraling. A bad idea should not be perpetuated. And right at the beginning after liberation, I was directed towards saving them. And I remember going to Butterworth and saying, well, why would you want to locate here other than a completely twisted apartheid logic? The answer is there's no reason to go to Butterworth other than a twisted apartheid logic. And that's, first of all, we need to move beyond them. Personally, I think DTIC is wrong. They're under political pressure from the provinces in trying to resuscitate. A few might have some mileage, but in general, it was a disgusting ideology and a bad system. We then came into the IDZs. The origin of that was a meeting in Cape Town with Prime Minister Goh of Singapore, who got up, he speaking to the then Minister of Industry, who was Trevor Manuel, and I was his advisor, and said, this is an opportunity for you because it's what we did. We realized shipping had to go through the Straits of Malacca, and we positioned ourselves as the biggest global transshipment hub at that time after Europoort in Holland, Rotterdam. That we then took up, and we looked at the shipping coming around, and most of it can't get through the Suez Canal, And increasingly, they can't get through the Suez Canal, as we have super tankers now, 500,000 tons, etc., that they must come around the Cape. So everything east-west must come around the Cape. Some can get through the Suez Canal. And there's cost involved there. So what we did was we said, okay, all along that latitude from Cape Town to Gqeberha, or what used to be called Port Elizabeth, they're on the same latitude. That's where the ships come in close. That never happened. So the original idea of a global transshipment hub, this was before Salala. This is before many others. This was all 95. Failed because we couldn't get alignment with the port utility, who had their own, totally own agenda. That has now recently started to change 25 years later, right? We're getting some alignment, and we may get, so I started the Saldanha one, was meant to work with the port, and we had a very good port manager, but the higher up in ports didn't want it. You know, there's a joke in South Africa. You have the Republic of South Africa, and then you have the Independent Republic of Transnet. Never shall the two work together, right? So Saldanha was meant to work together, that one when we started it. East London I started as well. That was meant to work with the port. Obviously, Gqeberha was the new port and was going to, none of these. Saldanha, we also launched at the same time and was meant to work with the port, but we always had a port that came under a different political regime. We're not quite sure which. That has started to change. That's the good news. I can't agree with Mr. Grayling more that the sort of transfer to provinces is an unmitigated disaster. Now we're looking at SEZs not based on economic viability anymore, but based on political expedience. You know, 2 per province, whether they make any sense or not. It's, in my opinion, going to cause a massive waste of cash. We're going to be, in fact, many of them are ones like Harry Smith that we rejected 20 years ago or more, 25 years ago, late 90s, when we looked at them and they've reappeared. So that is a big mistake. They should be national, like in China, like Philippine Subic, Clark, like in Thailand. They should be national because they are gateways for your country, like Singapore. You know, 90% of the goods coming into Singapore aren't for Singapore, right? So that devolution was political expediency, and I would say has been a great disaster. The area of incentive. So for the IDZs, when we first designed them, and they had to be, they had to have a link to a custom zone, inland port or port or airport. That has been removed under the new act. So anything goes and anything is going, and that's problematic. There was no fiscal incentive. So I remember saying in about 2010, we were the only SEZs in the world that had 0 fiscal incentive. That then later came through because we had a treasury in South Africa that was hell-bent on a, you know, free market Washington consensus that bureaucrats shouldn't choose spatial development zones. The new god called the market was going to choose those, completely not looking at what happened in China and others where there were great successes. So we had this ideological override that was also supported by the Bretton Woods, especially that was the height of the lunacy of the World Bank and the IMF, etc. That's when Zambia was crashed with the fire sale of all their assets. That was the, you know, that was the further, let's call it, of this new free market that didn't work. Now we know, looking back, it was a disaster. And South Africa was a victim of that. But not only that, the SAPs were done, the structural adjustment programs done right across the third world with the same result, disaster. I think now we've seen the IMF say, you know, what lessons can we learn from this unmitigated disaster, this free market thing that actually deindustrialized countries. So we had no fiscal incentive. We also had no labor incentive. So we had COSATU discussions, etc. And we looked at the model. We were close with the SEZ research, Chinese SEZ Research Center at the University of Shenzhen, and looking at all of that. And labor and hostels were part of it. But given the old racist apartheid hostel system of migrant labor, that was a no-no in South Africa. There was no ways we could have copied the hostels that were put for Pudong, Shanghai, and Shenzhen, given our terrible experience under a racist regime that used that, and the mining industry obviously used that to extract super profits by super low labor. Nevertheless, we spoke to the head of NEDLAC at the time, I won't mention his name, etc., at least trying to get what NUMSA had got in the motor industry is long-term, at least certainty. We wanted to be able to give investors certainty. You're not going to have a wage negotiation every year. You're going to, I think it was 5 years was the NUMSA one. And we struggled. NUMSA were keen, but to try and get COSATU, all the unions to agree to that, we in the end got nowhere. So it's been a long battle, and in many cases, South Africa missed the boat. I've been on the board of the Kuche zone for 22 years, so I've seen it all happen. And they're very positive things. Kuche is now assisting Zimbabwe on their zones, the Cameroon on the Douala one, also the DRC on theirs, and several. So all of our bad experiences have been turned to good. So other parts of Africa do not have to go through the trauma we went through. We are able to use those as moving towards best practice. The other issue was said by Mr. Grayling is this zero-sum issue. That has always been a problem with our unions, that they would be attracted from one to another. So they'd move from an old apartheid zone to the new zones. And the reason, the way around that was the export component, because although it's not written, I think, anywhere, the South African incentive, there's unwritten that you've got to be at least 50% exports. So we've had very few cases of the zero-sum game, where a factory moves from one location into the zone, and that's zero-sum from labor's point of view. You know, there was one case moving from Komani, what used to be called Queenstown, where the owner was going to shut down or move. And we were, no, that's not zero-sum. So a move had to happen. If they were going to shut down, you needed to do the move. And I only know of one case across all of the zones. So in conclusion, I think that the South African current system is heading for a lot of tears, or as we say now in Afrikaans, snot en trane, with this movement to the provinces who don't see it with a national hat on, and they will push for zones that make absolute no sense. I won't mention, but it's already happening. We have zones that are just going to suck very limited fiscal resources. I can see that nodding there. We have limited fiscal resources, so to throw those resources to waste those resources
Yeah.
is really unexcusable. Thanks.
Paul, fantastic points. And I hope some of our colleagues, all over South Africa actually dial into this conversation to actually hear this, because one of our concerns is exactly that, the fact that there's political expediency involved in setting up a number of these. I would like to give JC an opportunity, maybe just to add to the conversation. But JC, before I give you a chance, and I hope you're ready, is my concern is exactly this point, that at this point in time, I think the latest measure by UNCTAD is about 3,000 to 4,000 SEZs worldwide. How does this make sense anymore? Okay, so should we not dial back and say, look, guys, and I strongly support what Paul is saying. I mean, we're looking, for example, in some of the industrial parks. These should not be industrial parks. Ideally, we should look at repurposing them as something else. If you want to use the infrastructure, if you can't, just do away with it. Okay, let's be pragmatic about it. But I think the issue really is to start asking the question: well, if we have to sit with 4,000 SEZs worldwide, what is your competitive advantage? Okay, what is the value that you're adding that someone else is not? I'd like to, give Riemann Abubakari a chance as well, and Hippie as well. But JC, won't you just come in quickly? I'd like to hear what you have to say about, what Paul just said.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. It's interesting insights, because we now just recently visited Putitachaba to do some work in looking at possibly going into a resource efficiency and cleaner production. And I understand and I agree, those parks were set up for completely the wrong reason in the places that they are. However, what we do have is large communities that are fiscally and economically dependent on those parks. A lot of people with specific skill sets were developed in those areas for those parks. And although the parks, like you said, was completely put in the wrong places for completely the wrong reasons. And one of my questions would be to our international panelists or non-South African panelists, whether they have any experiences of old parks that was put up in the wrong place, and what to do with it, and what to do with the communities around those. Because as much as we want to, and like you say, we need to stop this plethora of new SEZs without there being a real market and a real opportunity. But what do we do with these old parks? And I think, that is also a question for Henry. Henry and the team is working very hard on trying to make these things, although you can't probably get it back to the heydays, as they called it, when it was sort of enforced, when there was just money poured into this. But you need to take cognizance of activities going on there, communities created around those, industries that have started there, that you can't just throw up in the air now and say, it was a bad plan, let's just cut everything down to the ground. I mean, what happens to those people? It's someone else's bread and butter at this stage. And I don't know if other countries are struggling with a similar problem. So from my side, again, it's, we need to try and make the most of what is left behind. And we need to be cautious on what we develop new. I think, and how we develop new. Yeah. Yes,
JC, that's a very important point. And I think what you're touching on, and I'd like to give Riemann Abubakari each a chance to actually come in here. But thinking about the just transition, that is a big thing now. Okay, especially in South Africa, where we have a lot of mining areas, end of life mining areas that actually need to think about, well, how do we change the dynamic? Actually, we're sitting with industrial spaces that have a similar challenge. Okay, and perhaps it's really time that we step back and just stop, okay, and evaluate where we're at and what can we do to change that direction. I agree. In a number of areas, you have quite large communities that have developed, and actually there's quite a number of industries, okay, most of them actually being SMEs. I mean, Putitachaba, I think, is almost 100% SMEs, okay, and so you actually don't want to take that away. So in Putitichaba's case, it might work, but there are other areas where it might not, well, it probably won't. Okay. And I think the question is, how do you approach that? Abu Bakari, just quickly, in Ghana's case, have you had establishment of industrial spaces in the past, whether they're SEZs or industrial parks, it doesn't really matter. But have you had spaces like that where perhaps the economics were not that sound, and maybe from a political perspective? I understand if you're concerned about being politically correct and can't answer, that's also okay. Okay, but or even established for other reasons that no longer hold water because of where human society has moved to. Have you had such experiences?
Well, for the current situation in Ghana, we've not had such experience, but as indicated by Paul, the political expediency is also being expressed as we are embarking on this journey, because we are looking at a 4-year tenure of a president who wants to do something in a particular area, or you have a group of elites coming from a particular area who want to send development to that area. But the question is the unique selling points in that area best fit for a park to be developed? So those are the questions that we normally pose to them. And we are also working with the development partners like the World Bank for their technical assistance. So what we are doing in our program is to conduct various studies. You do the SAT assessment first and ranking, where you can maybe assess about 10 parks, then the ranking will say you can only do 5 or 6. So within the 6 or the qualifier per the ranking, you follow up with demand forecasting for at least 20 years or more to see how many factories will be situated there, how many consumption of power or water and others. Then you have to model where to get the power, where to get the water. Is it feasible to spend money and do it and you don't get attraction to the area?
Yeah.
Or you just have to do it. If it is not patronized, you have done it. So those studies are always very important. And if you do that, you accompany it by the market sounding. The market sounding will bring out the partners to develop the park and bring in their money. Then you also look at using development banks to assist, either African Development Bank or the World Bank or the IFC. If they come in and those studies are negative, they will not bring in their money. And their participation in your program open your economy for multinational companies to invest. So it is always better to associate yourself with those development institutions. When they put in seed money or technical assistance, I bet you private sector are always asking them where to invest their money. They will say go to South Africa or go to Ghana or go to Namibia. So those are the issues that we need to let our politicians know. It is not about doing something before your tenure in 5 years ends or your tenure in 4 years ends, but you need to do something that will stay after your governance. And those studies always help, though it wastes time. One government will start the studies and to realize it is in the middle of their tenure. So to actually do the fiscal development, it takes time. So they lose the credibility if they lose the power. If they are happy to stay, then they continue. So those are the sensitive areas that we are always looking at. But it is always good to do the studies first. The studies will tell them how to commit and what to commit in which area. And the appetite of the private sector will even make it feasible. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Abu Bakari. That's an important perspective as well. Reem, from your experience, and also especially, of course, within the Egyptian context, what's your experience when we look at this? Political expediency, maybe location of spaces in places where the drivers that might have been there initially are there no longer. I mean, what does it look like there?
Yeah, I thought we are the kings of the random, or the cities or the places that were built with no reasoning, or reasoning that didn't continue. So as Abu Bakari said, starting with the benchmarking study we did last 2018, we scanned more than 163 industrial zones in Egypt, not including special economic zones, because special economic zones in Egypt have a special case. But if talking about the industrial areas, these 163 industrial zones, first of all, they have multiple owners, not only one owner of industrial development in Egypt. So there are the governorates, the municipalities, there are the urban communities authority, there is the development, industrial development authority. Each and every authority has developed an industrial zone and multiple industrial zones with their own mandates. So governorates, for example, they choose a residential area and they decide that this section or this geographical space will be dedicated for an industrial zone, whether or not it's needed, or there is the important factors that can develop this. There's also these industrial development authority zones or complexes, ready-made complexes that were ordered by the government in Egypt to help youth have SME workshops ready-made with the licenses. Most of them are good, but sometimes they are just built and the demand is not enough. There is a lot of supply of workshops, but not enough demand, or very far from the city. And we all know the needed criteria for such areas to work. So when we started working on this and choosing our pilot zone back in 2018, we had to exclude the random industrial zones, those that were built by one factory has built or one workshop has been built, and then others came and joined. These zones are very difficult. As Abu Bakari said, the physical development is very difficult. Yes, it's easy to provide them with technical assistance, offer them places in the new complexes that have been built by the government, but this will take ages, especially that they are taking electricity and resources from their own homes, or on very, very cheap prices, not for residential purposes, not for industrial purposes. So it's really difficult. Given that we were working with the German government and as a development agency, we need something that can be seen and can be developed in cooperation with the government. So we decided to work on two models, one in Upper Egypt down, in the downward part of the map of Egypt, and Upper Egypt, in two cities called Sohag and Qina. These two cities were targeted also with the World Bank support, financial support back then, and for the sake of local development. So this is a good example of collaboration between international financial institutions or international development institutions, between the GIZ and the World Bank. So we decided the timing was very good that the World Bank hadn't started by then. So the World Bank decided to develop the infrastructure, working on the infrastructure by financing these developments, these construction work. And from our side at the GIZ, we developed a whole package of technical assistance where we decided, is there appetite from the private sector to come in and manage the operations, or no, that can be done by the current staff of the governorates in the industrial zones. There was current management staff, but they were not very well equipped, not very well educated, have no experience with industries, normal people with no background of engineering or technical provision of industrial zone. So we provided them with management. We provided them with how to speak to an investor, what investors need. And to be honest, by then they didn't know how to speak to an investor. They just mapped the land and provided with documents, governmental documents, and that's it. That was a very successful example that we worked over 2 years. We provided them with trainings on key mandatory sources, how to do a business plan to your industrial zone, what are the competitive edge, how to work with other governmental institutions in the zone. It's still developing, but this is a kind of example of how to solve such industrial zone that already there, people are working and they have problems. So it was easy when the money from the World Bank was existing So we developed the infrastructure to some extent for sure. And from the technical side, the GIZ provided training and technical capacity to the staff. And there was a huge difference. So for example, as a result of such collaboration, these management staff are now able to do surveys to measure the satisfaction of their investors, to collaborate with service providers to provide them with cheaper prices of for example, we are planning to have an exhibition in Qina and Sohag to bring different service providers in one event, and the investors will come and see what logistic, legal, export, maintenance, technology transfer providers, and this in collaboration with the management. This compared to previously that there were nothing. Also, during the COVID period, we started to help them have internet connections with doing online meetings with the investors to see how they can support them, and that was very successful. Another example was in the Delta region, in the north of Egypt map, in a city called Sadat City beside Alexandria. And this is a big city with over, inside it, there's an industrial zone with over 500 manufacturers. And this model, we didn't have a management of an industrial zone to train. And we didn't have the World Bank with the financial resources. So we collaborated with the Association of Investors there to provide them with what we called a business gateway, a platform online where they can have the resources, they have the meetings. We developed workshops to understand what services they can have, because we couldn't develop the infrastructure or the physical status there. And to be honest, this city is also has advantages to be close to ports and proper transportation. So it's an easier example than the previous one. That's it.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think it comes back again, to that whole capacity building. We are moving into the final stretch of our conversation. I can't help but think that, maybe, when one talks about resource efficiency, which is all part of the green economy and all these, really, really important things that the whole world is going on about, and we have COP, 26 this year as well, so these things are all foremost in people's minds. Perhaps we should start thinking about a resource efficient approach to how we do industrial parks and SEZs per se. Okay. In other words, again, latching on to what Paul said earlier, in fact, South Africa at this point in time has no fiscal space to move in to actually support these kind of spaces. Okay. So we really need to consider, if that is not possible, what other alternatives are there, and actually face the difficult questions and the thorny ones, which I think, and with all due respect, a lot of people very often don't want to address because of, the impact on their personal sphere of influence or whatever it might be. I think we really need to ask those difficult questions. Henry, let's quickly talk about that. So, I mean, you obviously do a lot in eco-industrial parks and, working on resource efficiency and, things like that. Does it make sense, for example, to try and do this in an area, where there's actually not much in terms of industrial activity? I mean, should we not then just say, look, this is not going to make any difference. It actually makes no point. Can we do something else? Should we rather stop and say, well, can we do some study, some research, some engagement with local community and the people on the ground and the companies that are there to see how can we transition from this space to another? Or is, that mindset of, an eco-friendly, an approach that considers, the sustainability pillars of environmental, social, and economic impact, is that relevant regardless? I mean, whether you are in an industrial park, whether you're a company set up in some industrial zoned area in the city or in a town, or whether you're in an industrial park, I mean, is that, should we rather push that as part of our approach to this?
Thank you, Ben. Let me just take your last concluding comments and say 100% is, whether you are located in an industrial park or a special economic zone or not, the embedding of resource efficiency and cleaner production methodologies from the start of any industrial setup are very critical. And those are the pushing factors towards the attainment of sustainable development principles or goals. So in a non-industrial park setup. And that's what they call normally those industries which are set up in industrial spaces, whether, set up individually here, located here, just approach them and see how they can be introduced the resource efficiency and cleaner production concept, and they begin to practice from where they are. Yes, they want to get the benefits of industrial park, industries which are set up in a common area of an industrial park setup. The benefits will be different, but the embedding of resource efficiency, cleaner production, resource utilization at any industrial production process is very, very, very critical. And to me, if you look at if an industrial park or a special economic zone is well designed, if it is well designed, well planned, with bringing in all these aspects we're talking on and also making sure that resources are well allocated, well planned in terms of utilization, it has the catalyst in the promoting of desired sustainable development goals and reducing environmental footprints of manufacturing and production processes. And to me, the catalyst is from the NCPC perspective, for the last 15, 17 years, we've been working in this industry, resource efficiency in whatever aspect, whether it is on energy, waste material, we promote the using of resources efficiently. And when you promote the use of resources efficiently, that means you have some substantial resources readily available that others can also tap into and begin also to join the manufacturing, the production process. These are two different things. If you want to promote industries, you want to promote industrial growth, and you have limited resources, that means you have limited industries or limited industrial growth because you don't have enough resources to support the setting up of many other industries that can utilize the same resources. So that is very, very critical. And if you do that, it has the ability of attracting more enterprises and stimulate local businesses in the long run, as long as you specifically have those resources well preserved, well secured. And I think that one, in a nutshell, promotes your specific desired sustainable development goals from the economic perspective, environmental perspective, and social perspective. And also, I just quickly conclude here, touching on what Jesse talked about with the case example of Putadichaba, the communities around those industrial parks. They share, they compete with industrial park tenants set in an industrial park for more or less the same resources. So having those communities also being brought in together in the perspective where a special economic zone is supposed to be set up, and you bring them on board, you bring them together, you involve them and have them in the process of setting up a special economic zone or even revitalizing an industrial park towards eco-industrial development is very, very critical. It cannot be left unmentioned. Thank you.
Thanks, Henry. I think we need to start wrapping up. So what I'd like to do is give everyone 1 minute. Okay, so start thinking about if you were to share one key aspects that we would have to collectively or within our countries have to address to drive the development of SEZs and support that. Assuming, of course, that the SEZ or the industrial park has been established based on proper sound principles. Okay, I think this whole conversation about areas that may not make proper sense, it would be fantastic if we can have some kind of follow-up conversation about that at some point, because I think we really need to ask those thorny questions. Okay, and you cannot address these questions if you actually don't engage properly and openly and honestly, and really sort of dive deep into what the roots of these are. So I'd like to give everyone a minute, and then I'll just quickly summarize what we've discussed. So yeah, let me start with you, Hippie. I think, you know, in the Walvis Bay context, 1 minute. What would you highlight?
Yeah, thank you very much, Brent. And what I would like to, in fact, the take-home message is that transport and logistics is a catalyst to special economic zones. And we believe that special economic zones can transform transport corridors into economic development corridors. And I believe that the special economic zones, it's the right time for us to implement across Southern Africa, but we also have to be very careful in our rollout in this regard. Not every project or business is a special economic zone. And we have to also look out that, well, some of the projects could be revived, as Reem has indicated, like some brownfields are not necessarily special economic zones. So they have to be treated separate from special economic zones. And I believe that value addition and beneficiation of our products and as well as also the resources that we have can alleviate poverty in the region, but also elevate our economic development in Africa. You can look at tobacco that is being exported raw, copper, lithium, and the list goes on. But I think when we are rolling out special economic zones, it is important that we do not leave the SMEs behind. We should not leave the youth behind. We should not leave the women behind. We need to design special packages also for them to be brought on board and also for them, in fact, to incubate them into the mainstream.
Okay, you are not being fair. You are giving more than one. And your minute is up.
Yeah, the last one is basically that we need to also look at the vices of against special economic zones, over-regulation, the cumbersome processes, bureaucracy, red tape, and the politics that is being brought into the economic zones. Those can really bring severe damage to what we want to achieve.
Okay, excellent. Fantastic. Thank you, Hippie. Abu Bakari, 1 minute. Let's see if you can do this in 1 minute.
Thank you very much. What I will say is that industrial park or special economic development should be centered on the national economic policies, especially industrial policies. And we have adopted a way of dealing with it. Our overall industrial policy is targeting strategic anchor industries. We look at our import portfolios and we have realized that we import certain commodities more than the others. If you observe this and you think you can develop your industrial setup along those strategic areas, you do it. So Ghana, we are developing our industrial park or SEZ system on agricultural value addition, on automotive, and then on pharmaceuticals, as well as any other large opportunity to create mass employment. That is where we are targeting, and we will drive it to the end. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Wow. Well said. I think the whole clustering aspect probably could warrant a completely additional panel discussion. Reem, I'd like to give you an opportunity from your perspective. One thing in 1 minute.
That's really difficult, Bernd. Like summarizing my whole 20 years of experience in 1 minute. A quick answer, especially for the case of Egypt and other African countries. I wish to have one key leading institution with fully capacitated staff who are aware of what is in sustainable industrial development is. This institution is not to govern, but also to lead and to understand how to create sustainable industrial development. As Henry and Happy said, not to ignore women, not to ignore SMEs, not to ignore that the industrial community inside the industrial zone are collaborating together, and with the community outside the industrial zone collaborating together. This thing is key from my perspective. because having multiple players, having multiple mandates, that's what caused the problem initially that we are suffering from, and also from what I hear today about the South African experience. Also, this institution can decide which industrial industrial institutions can collaborate together to form a symbiosis or a cluster that can be beneficial to this community where it's located. That is in a nutshell. I hope I didn't exceed the 1 minute.
Wow, that is fantastic. Well done.
Thank you.
Let's see if JC you can beat that.
1 minute. All
1
right.
minute.
I think decisions on industrial parks, SEZs first needs to be supported by an economic argument. It needs to be a feasibility, not someone's idea. Secondly, I think competent management, whether it's a new SEZ, an old industrial park, we need to put people in place that knows how to manage these things. And when we do these things, it must be accountable in terms of 3 elements: environmental impact, the social impact on the communities, whether it's new or old, and obviously the economic impact it has on the fiscus through support by government or the provinces, nationally, locally, whatever. Whatever is done there must be accountability for the money spent there. It must have a positive impact on this, on the economy, on the environment, and on the community in which it is created. Ultimately, then, I think as a country, we will benefit from these. But yeah, we have to have those 3 things in place to be able to make this a success. Thanks.
Excellent. That is really good. Paul, 1 minute. What's your take-home message? I know it's difficult, but if you were to say this in 1 minute.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't unmute very easily.
Okay.
I'd like to agree with JC and, in fact, Hippie and others. They're all saying the same thing. We need a very clear, objective, arm's length viability study. We cannot say, oh, there's because there's a community where there used to be a mine, because we got ghost towns everywhere. We're then going to throw good money after bad. So that's the issue. The most important point is economic viability, and that must not be done by the motivators. No referee player. That must be done by someone separate, and that needs to go with national buy-in. We can't have DTIC pushing special economic zones, and then what we had in South Africa for decades, Treasury saying, no, I'm not playing in that game. I'm not part of this government, right? And we had that also with Transnet, not playing the game. So that came from Riem, who said, you need some capacitated national method of doing it, and bringing the last point is just looking at the new one in Tshwane and how that also happened with the Nelson Mandela Bay Logistics Park is the key element that the Chinese saw of bringing in OEMs who then bring in all of their tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. And the advantage of that, as you know, is the OEMs are God. That you don't have to attract them. They are given their marching orders by like Mercedes-Benz. You will come and locate in the supplier park. So that also brings in your SMMEs.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. Very succinct. Henry, you're the last one. 1 minute. Take our message.
Well, just pick on the last words of Jordan. Yes, from our South African perspective, we are already pushing for special economic zones development in South Africa. But what I would love to see from my own little experience on the ground is to have an all-inclusive approach where the industrialists or the tenants who are supposed to be located in these particular special economic zones are well aware, I know it is happening, but let us rehearse and make sure they are involved from the start as we go forward. We go with them, they know that concept, they know what needs to be done, and they know how, they just get to be told how it will be applied, and they see how they can apply that. And with that, I think towards the end of it, we shall see very, very, very good, productive results when we have our special economic zones established up and running. I would stop from there. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Good one. Wow. Okay. Thank you. Time flies really, especially if you have, all these really exciting aspects and topics to cover. Just briefly, a couple of things that come out very strongly for me is, it's important to have a clear direction and understanding of why you want to do this, which is underpinned by proper evidence and research, okay, and studies and whatever other work you need, okay? And that includes establishing proper economic drivers. Adam Smith in Wealth of Nations, which is a couple of, 200 years old, odd, book, wrote location for a company, okay? Any kind of economic activity still is subject to that, okay? And without the economics, the other things fall flat, okay? So I think that's very clear. A second thing that comes out is the enabling environment of that space, whether it's an SEZ, an industrial park, or whatever it is, which includes, of course, infrastructure. Something that Abu Bakari really expanded nicely for us on is really looking at the regulatory aspects. What kind of support can you give? Paul touched on some of the support mechanisms that we should have considered, or that we didn't consider at all, okay, in terms of incentives, financial incentives, those kinds of things. The fact that, building on that you need alignment with the various stakeholders. I think that becomes very clear, which also then leads into the next critical aspect, it seems, is that collaboration really is crucial, okay? It's not just government that does this, private sector has a certain role to play. There's a certain contribution from the community side that we need to consider, especially if you start looking at integrating this into regional development and supporting social enterprise, okay? So I think this, these kinds of things become very important. If I look through my notes, I think, what is important is also, the fact that you want a specific focus for that SEZ or that industrial park, which speaks to the clustering approach as well, something that Paul mentioned now as well. Especially in the automotive industry, we've seen this all over. We've seen this in one or two of our other industrial parks where you have an anchor tenant with a whole range of their suppliers. And that makes sense. It also makes sense from an industrial symbiosis perspective. Okay. So I think, the way probably to address this, especially if there's some political involvement, is, politicians want to build a legacy. But you know what? You don't build a legacy in 5 years. You build a legacy with a whole range of people that you take with you and that you leave for the next generation to build on. Okay, this is the whole concept of a generational approach to how we do life. Okay, so you build something, your children build on your shoulders, so to speak. Okay, and perhaps we need that deep understanding of really what is a legacy, because in principle, there's nothing wrong with trying to leave a legacy, but you actually want to do it with other people, and it's not just about yourself, which really what leads me to the last comment, which is maybe something we didn't touch on enough, but ultimately these spaces are about people. Okay, SEZs, industrial parks are about the people. We may have it founded on proper economic arguments and support and supporting infrastructure and an enabling environment and all those kinds of things, but it is about enabling people to actually do something, to make a difference, to have an impact. And hopefully that impact is friendly to the environment, and of course, has a proper economic consequence as well. I'd like to thank you all for participating in this panel. And with that, I'd like to end the conversation. Thank you very much for your participation. I think it has been most valuable. My only worry is, that we have not had enough time to really get into a lot of the detail. But thank you so much for your time. And until next time, thank you.